Hello, everyone. I'm Irene Papayfimiu, the Associate Director of the photography show presented by AIPAD. I would like to welcome everyone to this special AIPAD Talks program on the photography from Manzanar during World War II in the United States. AIPAD is truly honored to host this program in collaboration with the Japanese American National Museum in Los Angeles, California, and I have had the privilege of organizing this panel with Kristen Hayashi, Curator and Director of Collections at JANM, and today's moderator for this talk, featuring panelists Alan Miyatake, Paul Kitagaki Jr., and Elizabeth Partridge. And now I would like to hand it over to Kristen Hayashi to begin the conversation. Thank you so much to all of our panelists.
Thank you, Irene. Welcome, everyone. My name is Kristen Hayashi. I'm a curator and director of collections at the Japanese American National Museum. We're a national museum located in Los Angeles, specifically Los Angeles's Little Tokyo neighborhood. And I was asked to be part of this program, in part because of my role here at JANM. And I think JANM was asked because we're the largest repository of Japanese American material culture artifacts, artwork, and archives in the world. And while we tell the entire Japanese American experience from early immigration to the present, the strength of our collection is the World War II period. I think it's the work that we do, is very fitting and very relevant to today. Our collection is the center of our work here and really helps us advance our mission to promote understanding and appreciation for America's ethnic and cultural diversity. And so if I could just go back one slide really quickly and just show you where we're located. This is our museum. We started in this brick building, which was the former Honpa Honganji Buddhist Temple building, and it was the first Buddhist temple built in Los Angeles. And so the museum opened in that building in 1992. And then this glass building that you see on the right there is our pavilion building, which was built in 1999. And, JANM was founded in Little Tokyo, which has always been the heart of the Japanese American community, but it's also a site of conscience. That is what we say, because in 1942, and you see these photographs on the right from our collection, we know that this was a street before this which kind of goes across our plaza here. And we know from these historical photographs that buses were lined up and people were sort of milling about with their belongings. And you see in the top photo a military police officer organizing this line. And this is 1942, and over 80 years later, it was a reminder that this was a site of conscience, because just last year, over 100 or somewhere between 75 and 100 CBP agents were on our campus once again during the immigration raids last summer. And it was just this reminder, just of like reverberations of the past, I think. So I think this program that you're going to see today, is very fitting and unfortunately very resonant to what is happening around us today. Next slide, please. So just a little bit about, this history. The incarceration, forced removal and incarceration didn't happen solely as a result of Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor. This is part of this long trajectory of discrimination and prejudice towards Japanese immigrants and their descendants, but, other immigrants of color, communities of color. This map is showing you just the impact during World War II. There were 75 confinement sites that detained Japanese immigrants and their descendants during World War II. And today we're talking about one that's probably one of the most well-known, and that's Manzanar, which was located in California, about 200 miles, a little bit more than 200 miles north of Los Angeles. And it opened on June 1st, 1942. And it was about 1 square mile of land that was, surrounded by barbed wire, guard towers, and over 10,000 people were incarcerated here during the war. So today we're going to talk about Manzanar, and so I just wanted to show you some holdings from our collection that help us to understand daily experience. So if we can go to the next slide, please. This is a painting in our collection. It's a landscape of Manzanar. And, I think that our collection as a whole, together we have crafts that were made in camp at Manzanar. We have diaries and letters. We have yearbooks. We have artworks like this. And I think comprehensively, it tells us about the day-to-day experience at a place like Manzanar. But I'm so glad that we're talking about photography. This is, the stunning um, painting that shows the scenery, and the scenery there is very stunning, but it doesn't really tell us, what the experience was like for someone who was, forcibly removed from their home and community, and forced to be there and try to make a very abnormal situation as normal as possible. So. Here's another example of a painting from our collection that, again, is this stunning um, painting of the landscape there. But together with other things, we can kind of better understand the day-to-day experience. So we'll go to the next slide. This is a photograph from Jackie Watta's collection. So Jackie Watta was a photographer in Los Angeles. He worked for Toyo Miyatake before the war, and he continued once he was able to get permission to take photographs, took photographs at Manzanar and then later Tule Lake when he was transferred to the Tule Lake Segregation Center. But here's a photo, probably in 1942, of families arriving at Manzanar. And so this is the Tanioka family. And so he's documenting uh, yeah, right. Next photo. And this is another photograph from our collection. The photographer is unknown, but I think this really does express sort of what the day-to-day experience, was like. I'm sure it was a lot of like waiting in line for the mess hall, waiting in line for the latrines, waiting in line for all these other, just mundane things in life. But this sort of, captures some of the incarcerees sort of in that day-to-day experience. Next slide. This is a different camp. This is Topaz, which was one of the concentration camps in Utah. But I just wanted to show this because it shows how artists like Mineo Kubo, who you see pictured on the left, really just because in the beginning cameras were not allowed, felt it was really important to document this experience. And so used her talents, always had pencil and paper or pen and paper in hand, and was just sketching constantly the day-to-day experience. And she turned those minute sketches, as she called them, into these illustrations, which became the basis for her book, Citizen 13660. So it was a graphic memoir that illustrated her experience, accompanied by captions, 198 illustrations that made up this memoir. And it was published in 1946 at a time when this experience was still a current event. It wasn't even recent history yet. But I think, it kind of provides a kind of complementary look at photography, these illustrations. And so I just wanted to introduce that to you. And these are, we have all of her drawings in our collection that make up Citizen 13660. So just something else to sort of introduce. And then let's see, we'll go to the next slide. So I leave with this slide. This is a photograph taken at the Manzanar Portrait Studio. Hopefully you'll hear a little bit more about that later. This is a project that we're working on, Giannim is working on with Toyo Miyatake Studio, because Toyo Miyatake Studio has archives of the Manzanar Portrait Studio photographs. And so this is the Watanabe family, and the Watanabe family and so many other families at Manzanar had their portrait taken at the Manzanar Portrait Studio once photography was allowed. And, if you just saw this photograph, you may have not known that this was taken at one of America's concentration camps. But I think that, it shows so much. It shows a lot about just the humanity of those who were, incarcerated. It shows the ways in which their lives were completely upended. Here you see smiles on some of the faces of the Watanabes here, but, Mrs. Watanabe looks very concerned. And I think it's very telling of just what she's experiencing at that time. But I think it also speaks to the resilience of Japanese Americans, those who were incarcerated during World War II. And we'll hear a lot about that, I think, today. So I think those are some of the themes about just how these photographs really, again, just underscore humanity and resilience too. So with that, you'll hear from our three panelists today who will help us to better understand the World War II experience at Manzanar through photography. And so first we'll hear from Alan Miyatake. Alan Miyatake is a photographer and third generation owner of Toyo Miyatake Studio, which has been in business since 1923, so over 100 years. Alan has worked for the family business for over 50 years, and he trained under his grandfather, Toyo Miyatake, and his father, Archie Miyatake. Alan manages the Toyo Miyatake Manzanar collection, as well as Toyo Miyatake, some of his artistic salon images that he took in the early 20s. And Toyo's Manzanar photos has been exhibited at the Beach Museum in Kansas, the Museum of Tolerance in California, the Skirball Cultural Center in Los Angeles, the Japanese American Cultural and Community Center in Los Angeles, and the Maui Nisei Veterans Memorial Center. Alan has photographed many famous people, including the Emperor of Japan, Condoleezza Rice, Vin Scully, Joe Biden, and many more. And so we'll hear Alan's presentation followed by Elizabeth Partridge. Elizabeth Partridge often writes about art and social justice issues, as she did in Seen and Unseen, what Dorothea Lange, Toyo Miyatake, and Ansel Adams' photographs reveal about the Japanese American incarceration. Partridge has been shortlisted twice for the National Book Award and has been the Boston Globe Horn Book Award, the Robert Seibert Informational Book Medal, and the Bologna Ragazzi in the special category of photography. Her most recent book, Imogen, The Life of Imogen Cunningham, is about her grandmother. And then finally, we'll hear from Paul Kitagaki Jr. Photographer Paul Kitagaki Jr. has spent a lifetime documenting war, disaster, injustice, and resilience across the globe, from Iraq under Saddam Hussein to earthquake-ravaged Mexico City and beyond. As a Pulitzer Prize winning visual journalist, his work is defined by a commitment to preserving powerful human stories. He's also photographed athletes across 12 Olympic Games, capturing the emotion behind competition, from quiet moments of focus to the intensity of victory and defeat. His images in sports such as track and field, swimming, and figure skating bring audiences closer to the human side of the world's biggest stage. Kitagaki's deeply personal project, Gambate, Legacy of an Enduring Spirit, revisits the incarceration of Japanese Americans during World War II, an experience that included his own family, who were photographed by Dorothea Lange. Pairing historic images with contemporary portraits, Kitagaki spent 15 years locating and photographing more than 70 survivors and descendants. Gambate, Legacy of an Enduring Spirit, has toured museums, universities, and cultural institutions nationwide since 2012. Was also here at JANA, and led to his book Behind Barbed Wire, Searching for Japanese Americans Incarcerated During World War II. So these projects have continued Paul's mission to preserve memory, history, and the enduring human spirit. So now I turn it over to Alan Miyatake.
Thank you, Kristen, and thank you everybody for being interested in this. So the basic story, Toyo Miyatake is my grandfather. He came to America with his parents around early 1900s. They came here to have a Japanese bakery, and Toyo was not that interested in that, so he was an artist. And so he actually wanted to be like a painting artist, but his mother persuaded him to be a photographer to kind of avoid being a starving artist. So he eventually he was mentored under a Chicago photographer, Harry Shigeta. And then soon after that, in around 1923, he purchased a studio, and that's what got the ball started here. At the same time, there was an artist movement with a club of painters, photographers, and poets. So he also joined this group, and that kind of satisfied his the artistic hunger he always had. So once he got his business started, he started servicing all the local organizations and businesses in the Los Angeles, Little Tokyo area. One very, very important client it was a Japanese American newspaper called the Rafu Shinpo. Um, this was really important because whenever there was a celebrity from Japan um, to be covered on a story, they would call Toyo to photograph him. So he met a lot of celebrities, including a very famous modern dancer uh, named Michio Ito from Japan. And he met some other dancers, and he actually photographed Harriet Huntington, who was part of the Huntington Library family. Uh, so from all these photographs, he entered some contests in, London International Photography. He won an award there. So now, well into in the early 30s during the Depression years, he meets up with Edward Weston, another famous photographer, and Weston was, like everybody else, was struggling during the Depression years. So he asked Toyo for some help, and he gladly asked his art group if they would host an exhibit. And Weston was able to sell some of his work and is very grateful. So we move on to the 40s, the World War II started. And that's what we're here talking about was, everybody, all the Japanese American were going to be put into basically prison camps. So Toyo kind of felt, obviously, this was an injustice, and he thought, no, this is not right. This needs to be documented. So he smuggled in just a camera lens and a film holder, and he snuck this into Manzanar, and eventually he had a carpenter make a camera body. He had a machinist mount the lens onto a drain pipe, and by the summer of 42, he was on his way to start photographing this injustice. And a lot of people say, well, wait a minute, how did he get film? Well, one of his clients before the war was California Hardware. It was a wholesale hardware company. They also ended up being the supplier to Manzanar. So he wrote to him and says, hey, man, I need some film. Can you sneak some film in? So they would sneak film in, and that's how he photographed, like this photograph right now. This is early on, and my family believe this was taken with that camera. So toward the end of 1942 in December, the Manzanar they brought in a new camp director named Ralph Merritt. And this all kind of plays a role with Toyo becoming a photographer because Ralph Merritt and Toyo's friend Edward Weston were friends. And he wrote to him and said, hey, take care of this guy for me. So soon after, Toyo became actually the official photographer for Manzanar. So now he was free to shoot as many as he wanted to. Uh, Although in the beginning it was a little restrictive. He would set up a picture, but he wasn't allowed to snap the shutter. So they had to have a Caucasian person come and snap the shutter, but that soon ended after a while. So after he shot close to 3,000-4,000 pictures in Manzanar. Like the earlier picture of the family in April of 1943, Ralph Merritt allowed Toyo to have a barrack and have a complete studio. So now he's sent for all his equipment, And then now he was really busy now with family pictures like you saw. So after the war was over, Toyo and the family returned to Los Angeles, and then they restarted Toyo Miyatake Studio. And by then, in the 50s, it was getting very busy. And in the 60s, Toyo pretty much retired from commercial, uh, taking commercial photography. So he was now concentrating on his um, Manzanar collection. So in the late 60s, there was a family that came in to take a family portrait, and Toyo had just started displaying these Manzanar photographs. And the son in this family said, "Hey, wait a minute, who took these pictures?" And my father, who was working at the time, said, "Oh, my father took these in Manzanar." And he says, "How many people know about this?" And he says, "Probably not very many." Well, this student happened to be a graduate student at UCLA, and he was working on an Ansel Adams Manzanar exhibit. And he says, "Wait a minute, I got to tell my professor about these." Well, long story short, this Ansel Adams exhibit was changed to two views of Manzanar, photographs by Ansel Adams and Toyo Miyatake. And there was a nice catalog made, and yeah, so yeah, that pretty much brings it up, to date here. I work on this collection. I'm archiving it together with Janum right now. And yeah, the more and more we're into this, the more I'm discovering more and more familiar names with many of the photographs. But thank you. That's basically the story of Toyo Miyatake.
Well, and you showed such iconic photographs. Do you want to talk more specifically about any of these, tell
Oh,
stories
sure,
about some of these?
sure, sure. This photograph, uh, it was taken by Toyo, obviously, and many of the uh, Japanese Americans who were in Manzanar, um, basically their meals were meat and potatoes, which is not really part of their diet. So some of them had decided, no, wait a minute, we need some fish. So um, this man, along with some other ones, and my father was one of them, they would get a hold of some fishing equipment. They would sneak under the barbed wire in the evening and hike up to the foothills of the Eastern Sierras. And they needed fish, so they would fish all night and get back before it was morning. And this is an example of the fish that the trout. It's actually golden trout, which means you're up at nearly 8,000 feet. So they were able to satisfy uh, their appetite by catching their own fish, obviously illegally. This photograph is I believe, one of 12 guard towers that was there for guards to be um, watching these prisoners in Manzanar. Um, and there is a replica of this at Manzanar right now. This is a very iconic picture that was featured in the Manzanar High School yearbook. Um, and according to the notes on the negative envelope, this is actually my father's hand, uh, and very obviously very symbolic of Manzanar. This photograph is probably one of the most iconic and used the most, titled "The Three Boys Behind Barbed Wire." It was a posed picture. Um, Coincidentally, um, I eventually got to meet them about 10 years ago. Um, they all got together and they all um, had a reunion of sort to at Manzanar. So it was quite an emotional honor for me to be able to replicate one of my grandfather's pictures. Yeah, very emotional shoot on this one.
Okay, so now, sorry. Okay, this is Elizabeth Partridge. Now I'm going to do Dorothea Lange's photographs. She photographed extensively during the Great Depression, including our iconic photograph of Migrant Mother, the mother with the children all around her and her hand up to her face, that we all know very well. Well, because of that work, she was hired by the War Relocation Authority to document the incarceration of the Japanese Americans during World War II. They clearly did not look into her politics because, oops, hang on one sec, everybody, got to turn my video on. There we go. They clearly didn't have any idea what her politics were because they just were happy to hire her. She knew what it was like to work for the government, but she decided to take the job because she had her own agenda. She wanted to show the injustice of the incarceration. So, without even waiting to start getting paid and do all the paperwork, she began photographing. It was very important to her to show what was happening and what was life like before there was this order to do the incarceration and then what happened immediately after that. So we're indebted to her for some of these early photographs that no one else thought to take. Next slide, please. So once the evacuation order had gone in, what Dorothea did was go around photographing the process for people, both in the cities and out in the country. Dorothea was a tireless worker when she had her camera, which was kind of amazing because she had polio as a girl, and probably she had post-polio syndrome because she said, I'm always tired. But she did not let that stop her. That's the kind of person she was. So this is in Woodland, California. And I just absolutely love this photograph because he's finished doing all of the work he needs to do for the what was called the evacuation there, and go to what they called the Assembly Center. You're looking at her quote on the left-hand side there. And Dorothea always said, you should be able to photograph a person from the back, and the viewer will know as much about that person as if you had photographed from the front. Sorry, you guys, I'm a very emotional person. I always cry when I get emotional. So what you see is there is so much in this man's back. It's just a phenomenal, phenomenal photograph. Next photograph, please. This, of course, is one of her very well-known images for an excellent reason. There's a lot in this photo. And this was the sign, I'm an American, was put up the day after Pearl Harbor, not even realizing the full impact of what would be happening. This was taken in Oakland. You can just read so much into this. It's, for good reason, a very iconic photograph. Next photo. So Dorothea had a keen eye for detail, and this she did a big photograph of the whole Moshida family, but then she also has this photo of the two children with their tags, because the fact that a family would be tagged to be kept together to her was one of those details. She said, we cannot lose track of this detail. We need to see this. And this the girl here is holding a sandwich in her hand. There were people who came down to these assembly centers and gave out sandwiches. Next slide, please. Now, this, of course, is a photograph that's going to get more important, as you hear Paul's talk. But this is the Kitagaki family, all just waiting before they are put on the bus to go to Tanforan. And Paul will talk to you more about this photograph. But what's really cool here is when you take a photograph, you never know what is going to happen with that photograph in the future. It's one of the wonderful things about leaving a photographic legacy. Next slide, please. Here are the barracks in Tanforan. Again, Dorothea just followed the bus down to Tanforan. She was like, I got to photograph this. And you can only imagine she has documented how people were living before, and now she's showing how they are put into these old horse stalls that have been whitewashed but reeked of horsehair and urine and were just, really not fit for humans to be put into in the slightest. Next slide, please. For Dorothea also, there was these spectacular mountains all around, but what Dorothea wanted to show you in this photograph is this is what we did. And she wants to show these dust storms. So she caught these two kids running to get out of this dust because it was very difficult to breathe. The dust was so thick. So this is just, this could be an amazing photo of like, wow, what a wonderful, look at those mountains right there. But you actually see the dilapidated living quarters and these kids running. And they're the only people who haven't managed to get in yet. Next slide, please. And here's a shot of the interior of what she did, which of the photographs she took. Not only are you seeing an interior, you're also seeing the tremendous boredom, the tremendous apathy that sets in when you're put into a custodial situation like this. It's very, it's an intense photo to me. And then this little hopeful little plant in a pot, like maybe I will find a place to plant this. And Dorothea did say in the longer version of what she wrote, because she very carefully documented everything, she said, note the curtains which provide a tiny bit of privacy. Next slide. Dorothea also, as the camp got running, they started offering people a chance to work during the incarceration. And one of the things they were hired to do was to make these camouflage nets. This was very, very divisive. They were paid, I think, 12 or 13 cents per hour for doing this when the going wage, minimum wage was $1.30. So you can see that they were like very, very low paid jobs. Some people did it out of sheer boredom, just like I have to go somewhere and do something. Other people were like, I have many relatives back in Japan. These will be used against my own family. So they refused to work on the camouflage nets. Next slide, please. Now, when Dorothea turned in her photographs, she had to take them over to San Francisco and turn them into this guy. He was a major named Major Beasley, because he would inspect every photograph she did. It has been put out by a negligent scholar that all of her photographs were impounded during the war. That's not true. They're all held now at the National Archives, where you can go and look at all of them. And only some of them were impounded by Beasley. We don't know why he made the choices he did. Some are kind of obvious, like, oh, she caught a part of the barbed wire fence in this photo, impound that one. But like he impounded this photograph of the library. And so we don't know why he did that, but Dorothea hated to be reined in, and she did not get along with him. So she would have to take her negatives over there, and it just used to really tick her off when he would go through them, and some of them he was like, nope, this one is not going out. But as soon as the war was over, then it was able to be distributed. Next. So she also photographed how people themselves made the situation better. And so this is a wonderful shot of like, here's a bunch of, many of these people were farming people, and like they needed to just get out there and work. This was the life they knew. And so they got to work on the desert there, clearing it out and planting crops and making the kinds of vegetables that they like to eat, as opposed to the canned spinach that they were getting fed in the mess hall. So Dorothea wanted to show some agency within the constriction that people were experiencing. Next slide, please. I love this photo. This is Dorothea titled this "Grandfather of Japanese Ancestry Teaching His Little Grandson to Walk" at the War Relocation Authority Center for Evacuees. This is Terazo Sakaue and his grandson, and Paul will have more to talk to you about this. I have a further picture right here on my wall when Dorothea moved in more closely and took a picture when the grandson was sitting up there on Terazo's shoulders. It's an absolutely beautiful photo, and I love it. Have it right on my wall. Next, please. So Dorothea also wanted to show how the family was totally disrupted by this situation. I think part of it is because she was a woman photographer. She saw that, the family, the core unit of the family was being fractured, because instead of eating as a family several times a day together, people were in a giant mess hall eating, and the kids would jump up and go off in packs and run around and do stuff. And so some of the family dynamics got super messed up during the incarceration. Next, please. So what I did, I put together this book with Chronicle. It's a book for young adults, although it's actually read quite a bit by adults because it's right on the cusp of the beauty of the merging now of young adult and adult books. And I first started doing Dorothea's photographs because I had grown up with her as my godmother, and I knew about these photos, but wanted to really dive in and do more. And I also knew that Ansel had photographed the incarceration, so I was able to include his photographs. Once I got deep into the material, I found, whoa, wait, who's Toyo Miyatake? And then I just love that I had outsider views and insider view of the experience of the incarceration. Also, Dorothea was very strictly prohibited from photographing things like the toilets all next to each other with no barriers between them, the barbed wire surrounding the camp, all those tall guard towers. So luckily for our picture of the whole incarceration, we have Toyo's photographs as well. So next, Paul Kitagaki found that he was able to go on to the next generation here and take it over. Go, Paul.
Thank you. Thanks, Elizabeth. Okay, next slide. So, how do you tell a story that happened more than 80 years ago? And when I was 16 years old in 1970, I learned that my grandparents and my parents were incarcerated during World War II. And why didn't they talk about this at home? And then I found that there's a lot more Japanese Americans family that this wasn't a dinner topic or that was discussed at home. And I thought, why were they locked up? I'm in this history class, and because they were American citizens. And later I discovered that Dorothea Lange had photographed my own family during the removal to incarceration. And no, not yet. And I just wanted to know more. So that became a 15-year journey to find and photograph more than 70 survivors and listen as they share their stories, long held in silence. And that work became Gambate, Legacy of an Enduring Spirit, about memory, identity, and endurance across generations. Next slide, please. So I grew up a few miles from the Tan Fran racetrack here in San Bruno, and as my family would drive past it, I was unaware that my father's family and thousands of Japanese Americans had once been held there during World War II. And later, at the same site, the racetrack became a shopping center, and I'd worked there all through college. And then later, another crazy incident is that my mom also worked there at the same store. Next slide, please. This is a Dorothea Lange photograph, too. So in the early 1980s, I worked as a photojournalist at the San Francisco Examiner, and I was sent to this assignment. I photographed members of the Japanese Car Haters of America Club in Marin County as they destroyed this car that was running, and they destroyed it with sledgehammers and jumped on it in a parking lot. And at that moment in time really stayed with me, seeing this kind of public hate still existed in the Bay Area, so openly at that time. Next slide, please. So my biggest challenge was to find the families in the Dorothea Lange photographs, and many of those images had no identification. And in 1972, I discovered this book called Executive Order 9066, and for me, that was like the first pictorial history that I've found of the Japanese incarceration. And many of those photographs were Dorothea Lange. There's a few Ansel Adams, Clem Albers, but for me, it was just mind-blowing. And then as I became first I was a musician, but as I became a photographer, Dorothea Lange was one of my favorite heroes as a documentary photographer. And a lot of these people, these are the photographs out of the National Archives, and on the back is like a caption that Dorothea Lange had written. And a lot of these photographs did not have names of the subjects on the photos. And a lot of people didn't even know they were photographs. So as I began this project, there was more than 7,000 photographs in the National Archives that documented this. It was a very big challenge trying to discover who the identity was of all these subjects. So in the 2005, when the internet was just getting started, that was the early stages of my project. So I began going into communities directly, like going into Japanese churches, gatherings, anywhere where I might find Japanese Americans. And I would just have these photographs and said, hey, do you know who's in this photograph? And do you recognize anybody there? And it took me like over 15 years to identify a lot of the subjects. So over time, this became a long process of searching, listening, and rebuilding connections across generations, and giving a voice to the nameless. Next slide, please. So, as Elizabeth said, that photo on the left is a Dorothea Lange photograph, and I really didn't know that my family had been photographed by Lange. My uncle Nobo, who was an artist in San Francisco, had told me that Lange had photographed our family. And so later in my career, like in 1984, I went to the National Archives, discovered this one photograph. So from this one photograph, I began closer at home, and I photographed my own dad and aunt outside the location in Oakland, California, where this photograph was taken in 1942. And my dad's brothers served in the U.S. Army. He was already in the Army before Pearl Harbor. And my other uncle, Uncle Nob, who was in the camps, he joined the Army later on and was in the military intelligence service. And then three of my mom's brothers were served in Europe and my uncle Tom Takahashi, he earned like a Bronze Star for bravery in the segregated U.S. Army 442nd Regimental Combat Team. And my mom rarely spoke about the camps where her family had to bring her bedridden father, who had suffered a stroke, to all the different camps of Santa Anita, Post, and then later Topaz. Next slide, please. And so these are the other three photographs that Dorothea Lange had taken of my family. when they were being incarcerated. The top two photographs were my Aunt Kimiko outside of Oakland with her belongings, and below is the library at Tanfran. And my uncle Nobu, who's in the background, he helped start the Tanfran Library Camp, and he also lived with his friend who we mentioned earlier, the artist Minio Kubu, and her brother in Tanfran. And then also in Tanfran, my uncle worked on the Tanfran Totalizer little magazine. And then when he and Minnie got to Topaz, they worked on another magazine called the Topaz Trek. And they used my uncle's typewriter to cut all the stencils for all the publications. Next slide, please. So this is Yuki Llewellyn. She was like my first subject. And we met during her first pilgrimage to Manzanar in 2005. And as she returned to the place, she had left at age 5 and carried only fragments of memory from that time. And she came not with answers, but with questions, trying to understand her own history for the first time. And meeting her really began the journey for me on this project. Not just photographing survivors, but listening and trying to understand what memory becomes when some time has taken so much time away. I met Yuki at the Japanese American Museum first, and she did some research there and found a little bit about her family history. Her and her mom had gone to camp by themselves, and she thought that her dad had died because he went to the camp. And then later she found out that her parents had separated and divorced.
I'm not ever sure that certain things will never happen again. I was born on Cracker Street in Little Tokyo, went to camp, and from camp went to Cleveland, Ohio. I wanted some kind of memory to come flooding back to me just by being there, and it didn't come. I still have it in my room, as a matter of fact, sand from the area. They said this is where your block was, but I didn't get any feeling of memory.
For me, it was important. This is a Dorothea Lange photographed in Sacramento. For me, what I didn't mention, for me, was important to photograph all the contemporary photos with a 4x5 camera, so the perspective would feel like the original photos taken in the 1940s. And this is Dr. Harvey Atano. He grew up in Sacramento, and he was incarcerated at Tule Lake during World War II. Yet he became the first student allowed to leave camp and continue his education. And he became a doctor. He helped discover the genetic cause of sickle cell anemia working with doctors Linus Pauling. And he became the first Japanese American elected to the National Academy of Sciences in 1949. Next slide, please. So Lange had photographed Kiyoshi Katsumoto, the little boy in the left-hand corner, and his family was helped by a white neighbor when they returned after the war to establish the family farm. And he later earned a PhD in chemistry and helped built a career at Chevron. He could play, please.
We had our constitutional rights taken away from us, and I just felt really bad that our own government would do something like that to us. The family number we were given was 21365, and that's what we were reduced to, was a number. Any name you want to give it, it was still a concentration camp. I mean, we were prisoners. We did not have freedom to go and walk wherever we wanted to. We were confined within the borders of the barbed wire and guard towers.
Next slide, please. I discovered that Annie Kaku was just 4 years old there in the photograph on the right when she was incarcerated at Santa Anita and later Topaz. And she sang Japanese songs she had as a childhood performer. But today, she said, she couldn't remember any of the lyrics, describing it as a selective forgetting of her childhood. And reflecting on her experience, she described the Ikebani master said, "For me personally, I can only say This created opportunities for us. It displaced our family in a kind of positive way rather than negative, and it didn't drag us down. In fact, it gave us some chances. Her family ended up in New Jersey when they left the camps. Next slide, please. So in this Lange photograph, this is 17-month-old Walter Sakaway hanging on his grandfather's shoulders. And I learned that his grandfather, Torazo Sakaway, age 68, died in camp a year later, and that his father and brother also passed away shortly after the war. And I found them from one of the park rangers at Manzanar. It wasn't until 1914 or 2014 that I actually discovered their name, and I flew out to Texas to photograph Walter. You could play the slide, please.
He was a trucker in Venice, California, hauling all the produce from the fields there to the market downtown. When they came back, everything was gone. As an individual now, if they tried to pull him up the hill, I don't think I would cooperate. The younger people, they don't know what you're talking about. Well, interrogate, what's that? And I think it's important for them to know that this thing did happen, and certainly hope that it never happens again to anyone.
Next slide, please. In this really famous, for me, Dorothea Lange photo, the grandfather's there. He has a stack of books wrapped below them, and he's standing with his two grandsons with their tags on them. And so Lange captured Jerry Osso and his brother Bill Asano, he changed his name later, waiting for the bus to take them to Topaz with their grandfather. And like many Japanese Americans' family, they lost their businesses when they were incarcerated. The grandfather had this very successful dry cleaning business. So during our photo session, Jerry mentioned that his brother Bill, who's the gentleman on the right, would be coming for his wedding in a few months. So more than 60 years later, in my photograph, they stood side by side waiting for the bus to carry them to camp. But they were together again 60 years later, this time celebrating a new chapter in life. Please play the slide.
Every morning he would pick up the clothes, and at night he would deliver it. He grew up into the Mount Eden laundry.
His dream of coming to the United States, his dream of making a life, were totally dashed.
Next slide, please. It took me 3 years to find all these 3 Boy Scouts here, and this is Jake O'Hara, Takeshi Matoyasu, and Eddie Kato, Boy Scouts at Heart Mountain. And they would raise the flag every morning outside the administration building. And all 3 families, the fathers were arrested shortly after Pearl Harbor because they were community leaders, or they traveled for no reason. So Eddie Kato, the gentleman on the right, said, whose parents owned the Sakura Sushi in Little Tokyo, said, I never thought of myself as a Jap. I just thought of myself as an American citizen. Next slide, please. And this is Ben Kuroki. He flew 58 combat missions over Europe, North Africa, and Japan. And he spoke at the Heart Mountain War Relocation Center to recruit Japanese Americans locked behind barbed wires to join the armed forces in 1944. And the decorated war hero also worked as a journalist for 30 years after the war. Please play the slide.
I had to fight like hell for the right to fight for my own country. I was the only Japanese American flying B-29s and to bomb the mainland of Japan.
Next slide, please. In this iconic Dorothea Lange photo, Lillian Matsumoto, she's a recent UC Berkeley graduate, and her husband, Harry, helps establish a children's village at the Manzanar War Relocation Center for more than 105 children from orphanages in Los Angeles and San Francisco. And in 1930s, despite being told as a graduate student interview that she would not have a future in social work, she petitioned them and got her graduate degree in social work at Berkeley. And there she would also later she would serve the Japanese American community. Please play the slide.
In early part of 1940, we started asking questions of the government, how are you going to move 50 children? Where are we going to go? Right to Manzanar, it's about 4 hours from LA. And she was only 4 years old. And she sang, God Bless America. And this soldier that was sitting guarding us, I could see tears running down he was really overcome by this little girl singing that song, God Bless America.
Next slide, please. So Ansel Adams photographed Carlene Kaketsu 8 in Manzanar. And she remembered games, movies under the stars, lining up for meals, and digging into the sand to sit together. She would also ask her mother often, why can't we go home? So later after the war, Carlene Katsu became an educator, mother of 6, and a lifetime advocate for teaching this history so it would never be forgotten. Next slide. Mason Tachibana 8 stood in front of the Catholic Church at Manzanar with 2 Maryknoll nuns in this Ansel Adams photograph. And before incarceration, the 77-year-old, he attended the Maryknoll Japanese Catholic Center in LA, where he said, what they taught us there was a joy. And then he said, and then we went to the camps after that, and any kind of joy, good times, just stopped. He later became a social worker after rebuilding his life following the war. Next slide, please. And Gladys Matsumoto, 85, was a teenager in Manzanar. She's the girl in the middle, in the front, and they're walking home from school with friends. And she remembered the wind was terrible. The sand, I can't describe the sand. It was terrible. It would come up suddenly, and we had to wash our hair a lot, and would get so mad with the sand. And born in Elk Grove, California, her family had been farmers and small business owners. And after the war, she rebuilt her life in farming again, but carried a lasting belief that what happened should never happen again. Next slide, please. And this is one of my favorite Dorothea Lange photographs, and it captured Helene Mihara and Marianne Yahiro, both 7 years old, reciting the Pledge of Allegiance in San Francisco before they were sent to Tanforan and later Topaz. And both parents had been arrested shortly after Pearl Harbor, and 65 years later, they met for the first time since their days together in school. Please play the slide.
School teacher in San Francisco, so they put her in a separate camp from Tanforan, and then we found out she passed away while we were in Topaz. She died when she was 51. It was hard for me, I think, being a child, to see her like that, when I hadn't seen her for a long time. No, I don't have any bitterness like a lot of people might. These men in fedora hats came to the house and hurriedly took him out of the house. And I was at the top of the staircase watching, and I remember the flashing lights, and he was gone.
Next slide, please. In this Lange photo, Carl Yoneda, who was born in 1908, was an organizer, labor organizer, political activist, and also a communist, who was arrested the day after Pearl Harbor because he was on the FBI watch list. But he was later sent to Manzanar with his white wife, Elaine, and their mixed-race child, 2-year-old child, Thomas, here. And he helped build the camps. But after 6 months in camp, Carl enlisted in the military intelligence, and their son, Thomas Yoneda, later recalled standing in school the day after Hiroshima was bombed, worrying about his grandmother who lived there. Next slide, please. And Dorothea Lange had photographed Mitsuko Jimoto, who was 19 at the time when he was forced to leave San Francisco with his family during World War II. And this is on Van Ness Avenue in San Francisco. And he later volunteered for the U.S. Army and served in the segregated all-Japanese American 442nd Regimental Combat Team, where he earned a Bronze Star for bravery while fighting in Italy and France. And for me, his story reflects the courage and the resilience of a young man who chose to serve a country that had first taken away his freedom. Play the slide, please.
I didn't know where Pearl Harbor was. The big day of our young lives where we were being kicked out of San Francisco. It was kind of shocking because as you grow up, you think you're going to have certain rights of life, liberty. We were citizens, but now we were not. Being treated so harshly was very heartbreaking.
Next slide, please. So Gambate, Legacy of Enduring Spirit, has been traveling since 2012, and it shares 61 stories and faces that reconnect memory, history, and lived experience among generations. And for me, going back to Tanforan, it also inspired a permanent exhibit there at Tanforan at the BART station, and also inspired a memorial plaza there that's from the community. And there had been the only sign of that there had been an incarceration camp, there was like a little plaque in the middle of the parking lot. So now we have this memorial plaza there honoring all those who were incarcerated there in San Bruno from the Bay Area. Next slide, please. So this is where the Kitagaki family lived, block 22, row 12, apartment E at Topaz. And my grandfather, who was a carpenter, had operated a laundry business to support his family, but built this chair from the scrap lumber used to construct the camp. And I recently learned that my mom's family also lived in block 5, row 3, apartment B after transferring from the Poston camp. Another piece of my family story that continues to emerge decades later. Thank you very much. And next slide. And so thank you for your time and listening to the stories that I think are so important.
Thank you to our panelists. I'd like to bring them all back. I'd like for Alan and Elizabeth and Paul to turn on their videos, and we're going to have a little discussion and answer questions from the audience. There have been some great questions that have come up. So let's see. Maybe we'll start with Paul, since Paul's video is on. I just had some questions as you were talking. You gave all three of you gave really comprehensive overviews, but I just was thinking, like, did the individuals that you met up with many years later remember being photographed during the incarceration, Paul?
No, most people did not remember being photographed at all. I mean, it's pretty incredible. And even when I did for me, like when I did the interviews, their family members, I mean, for a lot of them, that's the first time they heard their parents talk about it. So they wanted copies of the, interview. And I thought that was important too, to help them, I'm not sure, heal a wound. I mean, just be part of their family history. I think it's important. It filled in gaps for their own families too.
Yeah, so that sort of leads, I guess, to a question for all three of you. You're really helping families, I think, to better understand their family history. And so I'm sure you've had very emotional, stories of people seeing some of these photographs and realizing that was their family. Do any come to mind that you want to share?
I don't have ones that are connected specifically to Dorothea's images, but I did interview as many survivors as I could find. And even though they had never been photographed as far as they knew, and I just, I found it very cathartic, honestly. I remember talking to one woman who said to me how her sister had all these beautiful books from Japan, and her dad had this collection of samurai swords, and they took everything out into the backyard and either buried it or burnt it. All the kimonos, anything that made them look Japanese and associated with their Japanese lives, they destroyed all that to try to stay out of trouble. And just for her going back and remembering that and remembering the bonfire, just was really an intense experience for her, and hopefully good, that it was helpful for her to just let me bear witness to what she had to say.
How about you, Alan? I know that you've had experiences where, you've talked to people who found their family photographs in your archive. Can you
Oh,
share
yeah. I
some
mean,
anecdotes?
now that I've been working with Janum and archiving and helping me organize it better, it's actually amazing uh, how accessible this information is now. Because I still run an active studio, I come across many families that had their parents or grandparents in Manzanar. So I actually think it's just a tip of the iceberg right now because we're not even done. But I, with just the partial list that we have now, it's amazing how many families I'm connecting up with. The other's kind of a side note on my mother's side. As we're looking through all these archives, I found a notebook that was my mother's father, and he was a treasurer of the San Fernando Valley Japanese School. And because he had this title, he was arrested and taken to the Tuna Canyon Detention Center. So this notebook is all his notes on being separated from the family, visits by my mom and the siblings. So yeah, I'm constantly learning more and more. A few years ago, I was contacted by uh, this Kurata family who he was a machinist at Manzanar. So I actually met with them and took the camera that uh, Toyo made, and they recognized his work on he mounted the lens on a drain pipe, and they recognized it immediately. So it's pretty rewarding, and important. It's important that all this is documented because the it America needs to know everything about this.
So this is related to a question that was asked in the chat. This is a question from Oliver Wong. First of all, he says, amazing panel, thanks to everyone involved. For photos in which subjects were not identified at the time, how were people able to figure out who was who, especially decades later? He says, I came across a few examples of powerful WPA photographs from the incarceration years, but none of the metadata included the names of the subjects in the photos, especially for photos with children in them. How have people been able to identify subjects decades later?
Well, for me, like I took those, like many of those people in that are my photograph, they were children at the time, and so I think it was just, I mean, like I said, it was really hard to go to the Japanese churches, the bazaars, anywhere, and have these photographs, these iconic photographs, and ask people, and one led to another, and then for me, I was able to publish a couple of stories. It took me 7 years to first find my first 12 subjects. It took that long from 2005. And then I published a story in 2012 on the anniversary of the incarceration. And since then, there was more people that would contact me, and it just kind of snowballed from there. But even though like you were talking about people talking about it, even when I found people, they were very reluctant to be photographed or even to be interviewed. It was kind of like that Japanese enjo. It's like a term where you're not the nail that sticks up. You kind of to bring attention to yourself. So it was very challenging to get people to let me photograph them first and even interview them and talk about their family's experiences. And like a lot of them, like again, were children, so they have different experience than the older generation.
And I remember too, Paul, when you had a Gabate here at Janum, of course, you were able to identify so many of the subjects in photographs that these WRA photographers took, but you also put up photographs in the exhibition where you're hoping that visitors to the exhibition would help you identify some of the subjects. And were you successful? Did you find out more just from having those photos up?
Nobody.
No.
You know what? And it's interesting. The first time I did this, I took a lot of Sacramento photos, area photos, took them to the Japanese summer festival, put them on the wall at the church. And I thought, oh, this is going to be great. I'm going to get, these Sacramento people come in. And I got not one hit. And later on, I was talking to somebody else in the community. They said, well, you need to go to this Methodist church where they do the Japanese breakfasts for the elderly. So I brought the same panel over, and then, that started. Somebody recognized somebody in the photograph, and I got a name and a phone number. It just shows all these little incremental things about finding. If there was names on the photographs that were in the National Archives, that would be so much easier. And what I learned, I think, from Dorothea was like rushed to take these photographs, and she had somebody helping her write captions, but whoever, like the administrators, didn't like her taking photographs, and they rushed them along, so they were not able to get names to go with these photographs. So that was a big problem from the administration. I guess, putting a blockage on getting more historical information to go with the photographs, caption information.
And Alan, if it's okay, I'm going to talk a little bit about our project that we're working on together. Toyo Miyatake is so well known for his photography at Manzanar, but actually, like you said, he captured several thousand photographs at Manzanar, but very few of them actually are available to the public. And so it's our hope that, through this project, we're using some of the resources here at the museum to help digitize, catalog, and then make them available through Janum's website when the project is over. And Toyo Miyatake Studio will retain the rights to the photographs. But I think we think of this as like a public good, I guess. And we know that so many families will find photographs in this collection of their, family in Manzanar during World War II and how impactful that will be. So, we're hoping that we can also identify people in group photos or in some of the photographs that we're taking at Manzanar. Okay, I also was wondering if maybe, Elizabeth and Alan, both of you grew up with the photographers that we're talking about, I think. And so I wonder if you could share a little bit about your memories of Dorothea Lange and Toyo Miyatake, maybe say something about their personalities, since we've seen their work, but can hear from you about what they were like.
Well,
Go ahead, please.
Oh, okay. Dorothea was a very strong personality. She was one of the most determined people I've ever known. And she was extremely focused when it came to her work. Now, my dad was, he grew up with his mom, Imogen Cunningham, and then when he decided he wanted to be a photographer, he was sent out to work first with Ansel and then with Dorothea, these were both family friends because it was a small community at the time. And he really bonded with Dorothea and became kind of half son, half apprentice, half other working photographer as he got older. So we grew up with a family doing all the family holidays with the Taylor Lange group. Now, one of the cool things about Dorothea is she married Paul Taylor for her second marriage, who was a social scientist. And so he taught her the importance of writing down things that people said and captioning, she did those very long captions when she turned her work in. And, that's become invaluable to us to be able to look at the caption as well as the photograph. It is a bummer that she literally had a guard at her side, walking her along, watching what she was photographing, because, and kind of constraining her from what she wanted to do. So it is too bad that that was in place, but she worked within that limitation as well as she could. One of the funny things I remember her saying later in life was, I never did have a good job about that internment job, is how she called it. And I thought about that for a long time. I thought, did she feel like she didn't do a good job? Because she did an amazing job, but that was her character. She always wanted to be able to do more and do better than she had done. It just really sums up who she was as a person. And, I'm grateful we have all the photographs that we do have of the process instead of it being hidden. Oh, let me just say one other thing. See this great photo I have of Terazo Sakaue and his grandson. The reason I have that is when Dorothea was finishing up her MoMA exhibition of all of her work in New York, she made, this is one of the prints that she wanted to have exhibited in that show, 1964. This photograph, for some reason, did not pass muster with some powers that be. So she had to make another print after this, and she just casually handed this to my dad. So I was lucky enough to receive it from my dad.
Thank you for sharing that. Alan, you want to talk about Toyo Miyatake?
I was fortunate enough. I mean, I was old enough when I first started working for my grandfather and my dad. Toyo was retired, but he was coming in daily. So my dad actually threw me in the darkroom first to learn the trade. But here I thought, wow, I got thrown in the darkroom. But little I know how lucky that was because Toyo was mainly in the darkroom at that point, just printing his work. So I literally work side by side with him, and peeking over his shoulder once in a while just to see these images develop. And I got to learn stories about them. Some of them, a little bit about them through him. But as he got older, and my dad took over the management of this collection, he helped organize it, number it, and then he would add a little information because he was there. So, he added some names to it. Um, so now it became relevant to families. And as we move forward now working with Janum, is when I kind of discovered there was actually separate boxes that were labeled Manzanar studio portraits. And then I realized how valuable this was because it was the negative envelopes were written just like how I have my envelopes now, that with names, addresses. So, like I said, I think we're just at the tip of the iceberg right now. Once this collection becomes available to people, there's going to be a lot of people that could be interested in it. Not everybody, because that whole camp experience. For my parents' age group, mid-teen, late-teen, high school, um, they would tell me nice stories about Manzanar. As a matter of fact, one day I had both of them at Manzanar, and my mother looked, I'm taking their picture and says, "Hey, if it wasn't for Manzanar, you might not be here." And I said, "Why?" She said, "Well, this is where we met." So, there are people like my parents that they do talk about it, but as I meet different families and stuff, I find I have to be sensitive to their feeling, because not everybody openly wants to talk about it. So it's learning experience for me. I'm anxious to see what happens once we finish the project, so to see how many people that I'm in contact with. So it's it's like I said, it's an important message too, that the American everybody in America knows this story.
Yeah. I'm going to ask a couple more questions. One, I'm going to incriminate myself. I realized during my presentation that I gave something that was infactual or was not factual. And I realized it as I was talking. So this is a leading, I'm going to tee up this question for you. So I showed a photograph and I said it was by Jackie Wata, who worked for Toyo Miyatake and was incarcerated at Manzanar. And I dated it to 1942. So yesterday when I was putting the slides together, our database said 1942 to 1946, but it specifically said that the Tanioka family, who we know Michi Tanioka, And so I know when she was born, and she looked to be about 4 in that photograph. So I said, oh, 1942. But here we're talking about how cameras were contraband. There's no way Jackie Wata could have had a camera and openly taking photos in 1942. So it probably was another photographer, and it just ended up in the Jackie Wata collection here. So I guess my question is, and this seems to happen, right, where like negatives kind of get shared or passed around, or photographic prints. So from these photographers that we've talked about, Ansel Adams, Toyo Miyatake, Dorothea Lange, do they have certain styles where you can kind of recognize maybe who the photographer was of some of these photographs now that you've looked at so many?
Dorothea Lange really had this humanistic style for me. She was able to translate that on the film. That emotion, for me, emotion, and it's just incredible. Ansel Adams' photos are very great too, but he didn't have that emotion that Dorothea Lange has, where she's able to, for me, to get in there. But his photographs were fantastic too, because he got in there, documented all. He made some very fine portraits of people and stuff too. But for me, Lange was at that moment when people were at the worst moment in their lives. At that first part of the evacuation and being and those feelings could come for me to come through in those photographs. Just kind of like the migrant mother photograph, there's that it just hits you in the heart.
I don't know how she did that, but she could catch this nuance, okay, in somebody's back, in their eyes, but how did she know that moment to press the shutter? And also, because she'd had polio, she walked towards people with a limp. And as she said, it put her on a more equal footing with people who were displaced or incarcerated, because they understood that she knew adversity deeply. And so maybe they were able to be a little more revealing with her, as opposed to Ansel coming in there with his big presence and his cameras, because he was a very dominating person in his space, which gave us the incredible photos he was capable of doing. But they had a very different style. It's so great that they were good friends, even though they would, like any good friends, have their differences in how they photographed and what they photographed. Yeah.
And that photo that Toyo shot at the fence, that's just like an incredible photo of those boys.
Yeah. I think all 3 photographers understood that you can use a child to show vulnerability, and like innocence together in a situation that was clearly against all of our laws. So I think they all intuitively would find those photos.
That photograph you showed of the back that Dorothea Lange shot of the farmer, that was actually in Woodland, and I've still been searching for years for that person, who that person was.
Ah, interesting. Huh.
Because that, like you said, the body language, he's there with a cigarette in his finger.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like, incredible.
Yeah, Dorothea did a bunch of beautiful photos of farmers cleaning up their farms. And that's so poignant, because you're cleaning up something that you will not be able to move forward with. And it's just, last wash day, lines of the wash, like she knew to go photograph that line of clothes hanging and drying in the sun. That's just an amazing shot. Yeah, I would like to say also, besides all the photographs that you're going to have, Kristen, of all the beautiful Miyatake collection, all of these photographs are available, of Dorothea's are available at the National Archives. They're free. You can get different size reproductions, and you can download different sizes. And Ansel's work is all at the Library of Congress. So it is not at the Ansel Archives, but is actually at the Library of Congress. So a lot of these photographs are accessible, which is really cool.
Great. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. There have been some comments in the Q&A about, the possibilities of AI to help identify subjects of photographs. Hopefully, we'll learn more about that in the future. And also, someone in the audience recognized one of the photographs may have inspired a painting that's at the JASC in Chicago. Our hosts also have questions, and I think this is actually a really fitting last question. The last question is to all the panelists, and it's, what is something important that you feel the audience needs to know about the incarceration camps or this World War II history that we've been talking about that wasn't mentioned today?
Well, the most clearly relevant today is that everyone in the United States has civil liberties. We are not allowed to lock anyone up without a fair trial and without having a trial date set. And so, that's got to be such an important basis of our democracy. And it's been violated and it's being violated again. And it's just really important that we all pay attention and know that this is something we have to fight against, because it's absolutely such a fundamental American democratic right. Little d.
Yeah, and they're using they're using some of the same detention centers today. And I think that's so important for the general public to know that this is still going on. And like people who, I think one of my subjects, I'm an American citizen, but here I am locked behind bars with no due process. So and they don't want this to happen to anybody else, not just the Japanese American community, but anybody in the United States.
I think the main reason, like this goes back to the main reason why Toyo took all these. He told his son, my father, that I know I'm taking a risk on this, but I think, this needs to be documented so it never happens again.
Yeah. And one of my oversights too is, in telling that brief overview of this, I failed to mention, because to me it's something that's, so obvious, but I don't think it is to everyone, that, that there was no due process, and that there were no cases of espionage or sabotage. That was the big fear when a commission in the early 80s studied the reason why the mass removal and and incarceration happened, was because of reasons of, failure of political leadership, wartime hysteria, and racism, essentially. And you can argue that all of those three things, are present today. And so I think one of the other lessons is that this could so easily happen again. There were a few cases that tried to challenge the constitutionality of the mass removal and incarceration, and those were vacated, at a lower level. And so this is still, good law and could easily happen again. And so that's why, it's so important for us to tell this history and to, ensure that we stand up, because so many people remain vulnerable to today. So I just wanted to thank all the panelists for sharing their work with us, and to the audience for joining us today. And I'll turn it back over to Irene to sort of close us out.
Wow, everyone. Thank you so much to all of our panelists, Alan, Paul, Elizabeth. I thank you deeply for sharing with us these critically important photographs, this very important history of the United States. And thank you for all of your time and energy working towards these presentations as well. And thank you so much, Kristen and Janum, for this very special collaboration with AIPAD. It was really an honor to be able to host this program. And we will have a list of resources on AIPAD's website. We'll be pulling that information and putting it online this week. And please check out Janum's website as well. Thank you so much, everyone, for participating. It was a really special program, and we really appreciate all of your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.